Welcome to the lighter side of the spectrum, the podcast that celebrates the multiple hats we wear and the juggling acts we perform in life. Whether you're parenting kids and teens on the autism spectrum, navigating the ever-evolving healthcare industry, or building a more inclusive and impactful world, this is your space to find connection, inspiration, and growth. Together, we'll share stories, tackle challenges, and explore how innovation and inclusion create better outcomes for everyone. Because no matter the spectrum, there's always a lighter side. Now here's your host, David Kaufer.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the lighter side of the spectrum. I'm David Kaufer, and today we're talking about something that so many families in our community know all too well, and that is the exhaustion of constantly having our children's competence, intelligence, and communication questioned. My guest today is Scot Sherwood. Scot is the father of Lily, a 20-year-old non-speaking autistic young woman, an author. We'll talk about that. And by day, he works, and probably at night for that matter, as a radiologist. Scot and I first met last September in Atlanta at Presume CompFest. This is a gathering of families, spellers, friends, and allies centered around something that never should have been controversial in the first place, and that's presuming competence. Many people may know Lily from the original season of the telepathy tapes. She was also known to many through her relationship with JP, whose tragic death from a seizure was heartbreaking for so many in the community. But more recently, Lily published an article in The Parlor, which again, we're going to talk about. But instead of simply celebrating her voice, unfortunately, some of the response online followed a pattern that is sadly too familiar. People immediately started questioning authorship, authenticity, and whether her words could really be her own. So today, Scot and I are going to talk about what it feels like as a family, why this keeps happening to non-speaking people, how exhausting it is to live under that kind of scrutiny, and how we as a community can bond together and respond in ways that are strategic, grounded, and hopefully stronger together. Scot, I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm Scot, and these days better known as Lily's dad. So definitely my identity now is being shaped through her. One little correction on the intro: Lily's 21. She'll be
21. I'm sorry. Yeah, you just.
Year.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You even texted me that.
So she's 21, and she's kind of beginning her her writer's era, so to speak. We've kind of recently Lily had wanted to kind of expand her voice and start developing her little social media presence and kind of give her thoughts and on how her life experience and everything that and how she's gone about it and how she experienced therapy over the years, how all this is kind of unfolded. And the Parlor magazine editor just reached out to Lily after listening to the Ballet Tapes podcast and seeing some of her social media posts, and wanted to see if she would want to write an article kind of explaining or chronicling a little bit of her experience. So that's kind of where that started.
That's awesome. And it's so valuable. I'm glad that we're seeing more of that. And it's been great seeing Lily on social media, posting more, sharing more. It's really awesome to see that. For some of the people who may not know about Lily and kind of your journey, would you mind backing up a little bit? Just, talk about talk about the journey as her dad, as a family, kind of bring us, what it was like to where you are today. I know it's a long story, but consolidated version for
try to give the cliff notes. But it started early. Lily was diagnosed a couple months after she turned 2 years old. We were living in San Diego at the time, and so she got diagnosed, and we got plugged in and jumped right into all the early intervention, therapies and all those resources that are available. And being in California, we didn't actually realize kind of how good we had it as far as, resources and things like that. And we got plugged in right away. We got plugged into, ABA and speech and OT and, hit the ground running. Like within a few weeks, we were, all those things were up and running, and in the meantime, we're trying to like drink from the fire hose of information and just trying to figure out what do we do, looking at the research and, looking at all the advocacy information that's out there, finding, and you had all these, disparate, thoughts, and everyone's telling you got to do this and you got to do that and you got to get the, the IEP and you got to fight for everything. And, we're kind of you're just bombarded with so much information at the beginning. And, I kind of dug in. I like read the original Lovas article about ABA and where they got the 40 hours of,
no kidding,
of, where that kind of all started, where 40 hours of ABA therapy a week, kind of became the mantra and the gold standard, so to speak. And I think there's even another study that kind of followed that one that corroborated it out of Wisconsin, I believe, that happened a few years later. So those are kind of the two major landmark papers that kind of got ABA its original footing. I was looking at that. And so we were going in, and they originally gave us a few hours of it, probably about 16 hours to 20 hours total. I think 16 hours of ABA, a couple hours of speech and an hour of OT. And we were like, that's not even 20 hours. And, the Lovas paper says 40. Where are 40 hours? And so we were, had a meeting. We're trying to get more hours and more, because that's what the literature said.
That's what it said. So, right.
And so we, it was kind of interesting that as we were doing that, one of the ABA groups that we were with at the time, it's kind of like, then said something in our meeting, and it was like, well, what are you going to do with 10 more hours of Give Me Blue? And we were like, well,
that's a good question.
And then it really kind of struck us. They're like, wait, you don't, why are you saying that? Do you not believe in what your own, professional practice does? Why?
This was an ABA. This was actually from it's not like another parent. This was from like a practitioner.
From the ABA groups, and they were saying, oh, well, we have data that doesn't say you need 40 hours. We have data. I was like, okay, where is that published? And like, oh no, it's our internal data. You're like, okay, internal data that you're not going to publish, you're not going to make public, you're not going to subject to peer review. It's frustrating, but then we kind of moved on, and then we moved to another state, and that had very limited services, and we kind of were like, oh wow.
Remember, I'm Karen. Your wife Karen was telling me about that.
We're kind of basically on our own, and the school systems weren't, prepared for Lily. We ended up in a private, autism school, but then they were like, well, with all Lily, Lily's body was active like from day one. She's all over the place, just constantly on the go. And so they didn't have enough, they're like, okay, you're gonna have to also pay for a one-on-one aid. And we're like, okay, yeah. So we kind of, we over her childhood, it was really challenged to find a place that could accommodate her needs, support her as she needed to. But so that was a real challenge. But that was kind of our first, that first thing of, okay, why is an ABA group questioning their own methodology and their own practice? So it's kind of confusing at the time. And now later, kind of looking back after we've kind of gone through the years, progressed through different things. I mean, we kind of then pivoted to some really intensive speech-based therapy.
Okay.
with using the prompt method and doing a lot of oral
Right.
motor manipulation to try to help Lily form sounds
Yeah, right.
and do all that. And, that brings up another
Right.
issue
Yeah.
that we can get to a little
Did
bit
I hear
later.
prompting, Scott?
Yeah. So we, I guess, but looking back after kind of gone through a whole lot of things, we kind of went back and revisited that original Lovas article. And if you look at it, there's on the pages, it's on page 2, it's where they talk about who, the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the participants in the study. And they excluded participants who had a mean mental age that was a certain degree lower than their chronologic age. And so, and that of course is tested by, the Mullins and the other, cognitive tests that they do for kids at that age. Of course, every one of those tests requires a motor output to perform the test. So people with apraxia don't perform on that, and they aren't able to demonstrate what they actually know because they can't get their bodies to do what they want them to do. And, we had no concept of, apraxia or dyspraxia, no concept of presumed competence. She would score at the 1 percentile or less than 1 percentile on all her cognitive tests. And you look at that, and then they had made a comment that, in that original article, that one criteria excluded 15% of the original group of autistics that they were going to look at for evaluating ABA. So Lily was also diagnosed with borderline intellectual disability at the time she got her autism diagnosis. Right. And so basically Lovas excluded all our kids from that original ABA study. If the kids that also got a diagnosis of intellectual disability were not included in the original ABA study. So we talk about evidence-based practice, yet a whole therapy was developed that didn't include the most apraxic of the non-speaking autistics. And we know this to be true, from then till now, that, non-speakers make up about 30% of those with autism. And about, in 2019, they did a big analysis, and literally 2% of autism research included non-speakers or minimally speaking individuals. And I think I've seen figures more recently, it's up to around 6%. So that has improved, but still, we're talking 6%, way underrepresented. And we don't understand a lot of the, we still don't understand a lot of the things that are going on. I think we're getting a better idea of the apraxia part of things as non-speakers are getting the ability to spell and be able to communicate and be able to share their lived experience. We're getting there, but we're still, it's still
there's a long ways to
ground.
go. Yeah. I mean, it's the tip of the iceberg. So I have a couple of questions. So Scott, one of the things I think is interesting in our conversations, and I think given your profession, is that I think you come at this with a kind of a different perspective. I mean, you've been, the training for a radiologist. I mean, you're used to analyzing studies, taking a scientific approach. So I'm sure that you were very methodical in terms of, like you said, with ABA and speech and all of this, whereas some of us, like me, I'm just a journalism major, right? I'm just, you just kind of go along like, okay, this is what they told us. We're just going to do it. I don't really understand it, but I'm just going to do it. I would imagine, like you said, you actually read the study. At what point then, was there kind of this disconnect between what, maybe what you were seeing and hearing versus what you were experiencing?
For that part, it really just goes along with as you continue to walk down the road. We did all the things that everyone recommends for early intervention. We did all those things, and we were still, we did 10 years of ABA, and we were
10
still,
years. Wow.
10 years. and some of the most well-known ABA groups that exist. And we had, we were at the end of 10 years, we're still 3 out of 10 on Gimme Blue.
That is incredible. Right.
And it's like, okay, at some point, and it's not like there's not data out there. I mean, the discrete trial data that Lily was subjected to for all those years, which, I mean, that's kind of regret, putting her through all that. It was just demoralizing. And, I'm not trying to say anything, negative about the therapist. And I think there's so many, and pretty much to a person, the people that worked with Lily were amazing people, had great hearts, wanted to help.
Of course.
But as Lily says, and she's written, and, they meant well, but they were working from a flawed set of assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And that main assumption is that they're cognitively impaired, that they don't know things, they can't figure things out on their own, that they aren't paying attention, and that they're not learning the entire time. So it's not, it's not a matter of, it's a matter of a flawed system and a flawed set of baseline assumptions, that, the assumption is, well, we have to teach them language. I'm like, no, they pick up language like everyone else picks up language, by hearing everyone talk, by, looking and reading labels on the, on the cereal box, by hearing. And, we're at the age where we got to put the closed caption on TV,
right.
So that's going on. So she's seeing that, hearing it, reading it. There's, she's picking all those things up. I mean, my uncle talks about how he learned to read by looking at the cereal box in the morning, like prior to preschool,
That's funny. I was just thinking about that, Scott. I mean, in terms of our childhood, I mean, that's what, when you were kind of bored, you had nothing to do, like you figure it out.
Right.
And that's the part that blows me away. Sorry, I mean, interrupt. I was going to say, you're talking about some of these false assumptions, and this kind of is getting into, the backlash, right? And some of the pushback that we experience that you said is still demoralizing. But people are saying like, oh, they can't learn that way, right? Of course they can. I mean, what else? We already know that they are cognitively intelligent, that they have, so many capabilities. Whenever we've been in a situation when you can't talk, or, you're like, you find things to do, you absorb things. And can you imagine, like, if that's your whole life, of course, you're going to learn so much just by listening, observing, cause that's all you have. That's all you have.
Yeah. No, I love the phrase, like, listening doesn't have a look. We assume because they can't make eye, and the eye contact is challenging, and it looks like they're not paying attention.
Oh my God.
Nothing could be further from the truth. They're taking it all in. They're hearing, everything. They're hearing the fan in the other room. They know, they're hearing they're hearing the buzz of the transformer on the light pole outside your house. They're taking in so much more than we realize. But yeah, I love that statement that, listening doesn't have a look. But we attach so much meaning to eye contact that if you're not, if you're not looking at me, you can't hear. Like, okay, those are two completely different sensory systems. You don't require visual input to hear. Why do we do that? It's just,
Why do we do that? I mean, it's a great question, right? Like, again, that's one of those, these assumptions that, you could laugh at, but also has been really damaging to our kids because these are assumptions that have hurt them, right? You're not listening. You're not looking at me. Look at me. Make eye contact.
Right. Yeah.
Quiet hands.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it's like, unless you let me move my hands, I can't, you gotta kind of backtrack, and maybe it's halfway contradict what I just said, but sometimes it's like, I can't hear you unless I can fidget with my hands, and I can calm my nervous system with my hands then I'm able to focus and listen. So I mean, we see that as distraction when in actuality it's regulation. So there's so many things that we just misinterpret about our kids. But yeah, so we just kind of, as we went along and we didn't progress despite doing everything, you start to question. You're like, why isn't that working? We're doing everything that's supposed to happen. But we also see the glimpses of, we know she's in there. We know, we knew she had words at some point, I remember when she was 2, had a little bead maze, and she really watched a ton of Dora, and we lived in San Diego. So she was counting the beads in Spanish,
yeah.
all the way up to 15 at least, and I was like, at first I was like, she's just making noises, and I was like, wait a minute, I think I just heard quattro, I was like, and she,
Right.
and then cinco. It's like, oh wait, she's counting in Spanish. So we've seen those ones, or we see it where, like, my son, I tell him to do something, and of course he wouldn't do it, and then Lily would start fussing, and then she would go do what I just told my son to do.
Oh, wow.
Followed like a 3-step instruction, and we're like, okay, and we're like, sorry, Lily, we didn't mean we didn't mean you. Now we know that, just with apraxia, like, the body will get a command and it'll go do it, even if the mind doesn't, like, no, that's not for me. I don't need to do that. That was for Drew. The whole dyspraxia part then gets hijacked. The body will get the command and go and do the thing, even though your mind is going, no, I don't have to do that. Or vice versa. Your mind will want to do something and the body can't initiate the action, or will get lost in the middle of the train of thought, or won't be able to stop the action, once it's started. So, just kind of going through that, and then learning about, that's kind of where we were. And we kind of resigned ourselves to, okay, well, this is what it's going to be, and it's okay. We accept, we love Lily,
we'll support her.
We'll support her for all she needs, but this is it. This is what it's going to be, and so we kind of settled in and, moved to where we were around family and where we're going to be, having supports, even though it's a smaller town and not a lot of resources. We thought, well, we're just going to, settle in, be around family, have that family support, and do that. And and then we got introduced to spelling.
So let's talk about that.
So changed everything.
It changed, as is the case with all of us. So how old was Lily when you discovered or were introduced to, was it spelling to communicate? Was it RPM?
It was RPM. It was, she was like 12.
Okay.
First discovered that. So she was 12, and we had like a friend of my sister's that they knew really well, had a autistic daughter that was very much like Lily, very, as far as regulation and degrees of agitation and just constantly on the move. But they had gone to see Soma and did RPM and they had their little Facebook blog, and they would write poems, and we'd see that. And finally we're like, we didn't have much hope that it was going to do anything, and we didn't do it for quite a while, because I was like,
that's different. That's a different child, right? Like, it's kind of like, that's not.
Yeah. And it's like, well, and to me, my mindset was still kind of in the, I think there is some kind of underlying issue that's happening that's keeping, I didn't know yet about, apraxia or dyspraxia, that kind of thing. I knew about it. I didn't apply it to autistics at that point. So, but, so I was wondering how is this really going to overall help, and what are, we're like, do we want to go through this again? And
Right.
get our
Right.
hopes up on another,
Also, yeah, more hopes.
intervention that's going to do something and all this stuff, and I think that's one of the tropes that is out there about autistic parents is that, that we're so desperate and like looking for hope that we'll believe anything, and you're like, yeah, we're kind of jaded, actually. We don't.
I was gonna say it's actually right. It's actually
It's
the
actually
opposite.
the exact opposite.
Yeah.
We've been let down so many times,
I totally agree.
and that trope is just, I mean, that's what they say to us, that spelling is pseudoscience, but we're so desperate that we'll believe anything. And you're like, yeah, nah, you don't know any autistic parents if you're saying that. You're telling on yourself. You don't know.
You're absolutely right. Because I'm curious. So Scott, just to jump ahead a little bit, so you found it, like so you said it took you a little bit of time, but you got into it. But did you even kind of like buy into it right away? Like, did it take you a while to say, like, wow, like this is happening,
No.
this is real?
No,
So
it was 100%. First day with Soma, our like jaws dropped to the floor. We were like, oh my gosh, okay. We're like instantly, we
That's
were
great.
like, instantly we were like, oh, but then we were like, and that's the thing. I mean, and that's why for new families getting started with this, I think it's super important. Go to a professional,
Absolutely.
go to a pro, go to somebody who knows what they're doing, figure out, either the expense or the travel, there's a lot of scholarships out there,
Yeah.
do it, do the 3-day or whatever intensive, do it, because that makes such a difference. I mean, for us, if we had just tried to start it on our own, it would have been so frustrating and we probably would have given up. But the fact that we saw Lily in action with Soma, she was doing her multiplication tables of like 5s all the way to 200. She was wrote a little short story. She knew that war had been going on in Iraq. There was this, we were like, oh my gosh, she has been taking everything in this whole time. And we instantly changed. We went from talking in baby talk, talking in like 2-word sentences, and then just obviously, just talking around her like she didn't know what was going on. And that, instantly switched. We instantly talked to her like she was a 12-year-old, and we stopped talking about her in front of her, to like normal, like normal social etiquette, and so that was, so that instantly changed. So I highly recommend starting off getting that baseline, because then you see what's possible. And for us, it took years for us to get open with Lily. We kind of went to, because we were kind of isolated. We had to, there's nothing around where we were, and so we had to travel, and then Lily saw like Elizabeth Vossler when she would come out to Seattle occasionally, and she was kind of doing a West Coast circuit. Lene Crandall came to Portland, would come to Portland a few times, and so we tried when one of these professional practitioners came close to town, we try to, wherever we could drive,
sign up for sessions.
We would try to sign up for some sessions and try to get some of the parent training. And some of them, some were better than others, and including the parents and training the parents. But also, it's just like the repetition that it's required to kind of understand your child's body and what, and after time you can kind of see what's an intentional movement and what's a motor loop. And our kids get motor loops on the boards as well. And I remember, working with Elizabeth Vossler, and Lily was kind of doing a little triangle of letters in the corner, and she's like, okay, get out of the Bermuda Triangle. Get out of the Bermuda Triangle. I'm like, what? How do you? And I'm like, how did you know? How did you? And now working with Lily, I can tell when she, her intentional movement is much slower and more intentional, deliberate.
Right.
And when she goes into a loop, she just starts, pointing really fast. And so I know, okay, then I'm gonna be like, okay, stop, let's settle, let's drown ourselves again, let's restart, let's go. But I wouldn't know that or how to read that starting out. So it's really important to start with that. And I know not everybody, has those resources, but there's, getting to be more and more online. I know Communication for All has a lot of great online videos to get started. So much more information. We went through like a parent cohort training.
Great.
With S2C to try to jumpstart that. But it really wasn't until we moved to Atlanta, and we moved to Atlanta basically because, for Lily, we found at the time like the two largest communities for non-speaking autistics that spell to communicate were DC and Atlanta at that time. And so we moved to Atlanta, and Lily started in a school that taught on grade level using letterboards, and Lily was able to have open communication with multiple spelling partners before she became open with us. And it was we could kind of go through the lessons, and we could go through the guiding thing and the known answers and the semi-open and things like that. We could do it, but we only really got communication through her through that framework of a lesson, which is great for learning the skill and learning how to be a communication partner and that sort of thing. Still doesn't help you on why does your stomach hurt and what do you want to do today and hopes and dreams and all the other things that is human. So it took us a while, to get there. And we actually, I know FC gets a bad rap, but we actually had to use some FC. For me, we had to use some FC principles.
Really?
To get there. And that's one of the misnomers. And kind of going back to what we were talking about with the prompt and all the stuff that, Lily had done with ABA, they have no problem with hand over hand for text, the picture exchange communication system. They have no problem getting hands, in the mouth, kind of moving
hands,
all that, moving the tongue,
literally manipulating,
grabbing the tongue, manipulating. They have no problem using hand over hand, and they'll use hand over hand for the high tech AAC, and they'll do that. And what's different is literally the hand over hand is them guiding the finger to the icon or whatever. And in our experience, FC was totally opposite of that. That the touch that's done in FC is actually grounding and resistance and not guidance. And so I would, it got to be where I'd basically have my hand on Lily's shoulder, so her whole arm is free to do whatever it's doing. I'd push down to give her gravity, ground her in space, and then pull back. And so she would have to move her arm against the resistance that I was providing. And so that
feel that, yeah.
And so she could feel where her arm was in space, feel where her body was, and be able to move. And, we did that for a little bit. Since, faded, that out. We don't use that at all. We're kind of, right now we're working on the keyboard and, spelling using a keyboard with it displaying on an iPad or a phone or something. And haven't gotten to where we can put the keyboard in the stand yet and not be holding it, but it's a progression. It's, and they want to invalidate the spelling. They'll accept, if they can type independently without anything, without any supports or whatever, we'll believe it. But they'll invalidate every step along the way to get
to that point.
Yeah. We don't do that. It's like in ballet, like the kids, you stand in front of the mirror and you hold the bar, right? And you're doing that, and the instructor is moving your arms and legs to where they're supposed to be.
Or your feet,
and all that stuff. And there's all motor manipulation and all that. And it's like there's that, unless you can perform, Swan Lake at the Met, then we don't believe you can dance. Where you're not a ballet, you're not a little ballerina, And we don't do that with anything else, but we do that with spelling. And it's just, yeah, it's exhausting, like you mentioned.
It is exhausting. And that's a great segue to one of our segments we were talking about earlier. We're going to kick today off with Autism Fact or Fiction.
Get QuickTime ready, and here we go. This is Autism Fact or Fiction. We're breaking down what's real, what's rumor, and what might surprise you. Let's go.
All right. So this is where we get to debunk a myth or talk about, again, some stereotype that's out there. In a way, you kind of did that, Scott, in terms of...
Yeah, well, I got another one.
Yeah, go for
it. Kind of a left turn here, but related.
All right.
So a lot, obviously we know a lot of the research is done more on, low support needs, autistics, and not much on our, apraxic high support needs autistics. And I think one of the kind of the features, maybe a stereotype, but this whole concept of like lacking, social, social understanding, social cues, sarcasm that sometimes, autistics may have trouble, kind of reading, getting the jokes, reading the sarcasm, that kind of thing. And so I think the fiction is that they wrongly apply that stereotype to non-speakers.
Right.
And
right. Yeah.
Non-speakers read the room. They understand the subtlety and nuance and talk about sarcasm. I think sarcasm is a non-speaker's native tongue. I think that's their native tongue. They speak sarcasm and snark more than probably any group that I know.
And do you blame them, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
It's a survival skill. I mean, could you imagine?
Yeah. So that's like going to, so kind of segue back to where, the detractors of all this. I mean, recently that Woody Brown piece about his book, and then there's an article in the Atlantic criticizing it. And in that article, the guy assumes that stereotype about Woody Brown, that how can he speak in all these beautiful metaphors and all this nuance and subtlety when we know that autistics have trouble with that. And like, because non-speakers don't have trouble with that.
Yeah.
Non-speakers are very poetic and and come up with, comparisons and metaphors that I can't, I'm like, wow, I would not have put those together. I would not have, that was nowhere on my radar for how to see that. And they see the world in a beautiful way. And that we don't understand, again, because we've only studied 2 to 6% of non-speakers are even studied. So anyway, that was one of the things in that article in the Atlantic that I was like, no, that proves you don't really understand non-speakers or haven't been exposed to that many of them, because they all speak in beautiful metaphor, and they all understand the subtlety and nuance. And it's this, my daughter literally would call them voice using autistics. So the voice using autistics, that may be a challenge for them. It's not a challenge for the non-speakers.
No, that's such a great point. And you're absolutely right. And that's what's consistent kind of across the board too, with the non-speakers. Like you said, they can access this beautiful language no matter what. And time again, whether it's the parent who's the communication partner, they write about things that we have no idea they're going to write about, or in ways that doesn't match our writing necessarily. Again, this whole notion that somehow it's being influenced by the communication partner is just exhausting. Like, I know, and I didn't read the piece. Full transparency, I'm exhausted. I, as you know, Scott, I fight my battles against the naysayers. I do that on a day-to-day basis. I don't want to immerse myself and subscribe to a publication that's just kind of perpetuated. But I saw some of the general the gist of his argument, kind of like, hey, well, his mom, I guess, is an English literature professor. And so, the language he was using must have been directed by her. And like I said, just kind of ignoring what you said, Scott, that just this lack of understanding, which frankly probably goes for seriously, like 98% of our population have no clue about how non-speakers think or their capability. I mean, there's just such a heavy, I think, systemic bias towards them and lack of understanding. Think about how much we've learned, right? I mean, again, I put myself in that category before a couple of years ago, and I'm still learning he still says things. I'm like, whoa, okay. I didn't know that. I didn't know that about you. Right. I mean,
yeah, for sure. It's a constant learning process. And that's the thing that's exhausting. Is like, where's the humility? Where's the, there's this, the so-called professionals, so-called experts, complete lack of humility. They feel like they've figured it out. They've got all the answers. And yet the problem is if they would release their, proprietary data, the data doesn't back them up, and there's actually been a couple of recent studies questioning the efficacy of ABA. You have the Department of Defense did one with a lot of their TRICARE program that questioned it. I know that I think United Healthcare had one also that was questioning it. But that, I've got to give it to the ABA lobby that got their, therapy, what they did, the PR that they did to get that to, become the quote gold standard and get, 40 hours a week and, get the insurance and funding, for it.
It's a machine.
That's they got some work done. And the problem is it doesn't work for everybody, but then that's the only, the people are trapped. That's like the one thing that they can get paid services for. And, the vast majority of people, like, you can't, it's just cost prohibitive to get the care that our kids actually need. And the fact that it's limited to one modality that wasn't even originally studied for our population, and then rejecting it for other things. It's like with spelling, when you find that it works, but now, you can't use those funds for spelling. And there's a big battle in California over regional centers funding. And even though, regional centers are great, they even saw the fact that, we need to have a self-determination funds, that families know what their kids need and they know best. And we have a certain amount of self-determination funds for the things that are going to support your individual child the best. And now they're, getting rejections for anything that's spelling related from the regional center. So they're not self-determination funds anymore. They are determined funds for their approved. And it's, again, a handful of gatekeepers, handful of ABA, and a handful of, ASHA, SLP, that these groups are taking guidance from. Hopefully the tipping point, is changing, and that our voices are getting, more numerous, loud and louder, and, the sheer numbers, they're not going to be able to ignore for too much longer. And that's something Lily said back in 2023. We were all gathered. We were over at Libby's house. This is after JP's passing. Mm-hmm. And someone asked Lily, what's it going to take for people to, see that
to accept it,
works, and she's like, what's it going to be? Are there going to be studies, scientific studies that prove it? Are there going to be court cases? Is it going to be whatever? And Lily just goes, sheer numbers is what she spelled.
She's right.
Sheer numbers.
Absolutely right.
It's just going to take the number of spellers that it's going to be undeniable, because people will see it with their own eyes, and that's what's maddening about this whole thing, and all the gatekeepers are just like, what, you going to believe me or your lying eyes, and they're just, I'm like, no, that's their attitude. And I'm like, no, this, the fact that you're just gaslighting us, that what is happening in front of all of us to plainly see, if you have an objective mind, is happening, and your denial of it.
Isn't that been your experience though, Scott? Like, is that outside of the gatekeepers, like everyone else that you deal with, right? Are people just so open to it, so support, like, again, the general population, they don't, like you said, you can't unsee when you see it. I mean, that's
we did that, because we'll take, when we go, we'll take a letter board when we go to the doctor, like her doctor accepts it,
oh yeah, 100%.
Her doctor sees it. We've had multiple doctors, and I mean, remember one of them even on Zoom, during COVID, we had one doctor, and then afterward, we asked if Lily had any questions, and she asked, some really meaningful questions that I wouldn't ask, being a physician myself, I was like, okay, I know the answer to that. I could have answered that for you, Lily, but no, it's great that she can ask the doctor herself and doesn't have to go through me. But yeah, and the doctor was like, wow, that's remarkable. That's he saw it over Zoom. We've done it multiple times in person in the office. We do it when we go to a restaurant, and the people at the restaurant see it. Other things, sometimes the environment is too much. She's dysregulated.
Right.
She can't
It's
spell
hard
on demand. It's being put on the spot is a challenge, like all of us, we
sure,
a lot of us
go up there and make
had
a speech,
fear of public speaking. It's like all of
Yeah.
a sudden you can't remember, or someone asks you a question, you're like, okay, I literally, that piece of knowledge was here and I literally saw it leave my brain and it's gone. I'm sorry,
Well, yeah, that's the other part about like the whole, like, again, there's always so much we can talk about, but the testing that sometimes is required, right? The message passing test, these testing on demand, and you get one shot to pass it, so to speak, and if you don't know, they say it invalidates it. We're like,
right. And the thing is, what's not hard is to create a task for an apraxic, non-speaking autistic, to create a task that they can't perform. That's not hard at all. That's easy. And so, I mean, that's what they've done with the message passing test.
That's exactly what they've done.
They made a hoop that are, for whatever reason, our kids, it's challenging for them to jump through on demand. But just, you can make a hoop that I can't jump through. That doesn't mean I can't jump. That just means I had trouble jumping through your created hoop. And the whole idea that even if they call it a double-blind test is really a misnomer. It's like they're borrowing, they're basically clout chasing for, like, one of the gold standards in medical research is the double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And so double blind. I mean, the branding and the marketing, they're great. I was
gonna say they use the language. They use
and so we double blinded it, but or whatever. And so they call it a double blind. It's like, okay, whatever, And then they call it the gold standard, and then they don't accept any other verification of authorship. You mentioned it before that our kids have a style of writing that's different than ours. And they've had communication partners submit a writing sample, and autistics spell a writing sample, and they evaluate the linguistic style, and it's all the evaluation tools of that. And you're like, oh yeah, so this is clearly two different voices, two different authors, two different styles. And, they've done that, and they constantly move the bar. They're constantly moving the bar, and at first is like, they didn't like FC even, though it's providing grounding and resistance and not guidance toward the target. It's resistance away from the target. Not, as opposed to hand over hand, which they have no problem with. They said that, and they're like, okay, well, we'll do that. We'll not touch. We'll just, provide emotional regulation support and motor coaching. And they're like, oh, no, you can't do that. It's like, you're holding the board, you're moving it or whatever. It's like, fine, we'll put it in a stand and put eye tracking glasses on them. And we'll demonstrate that they look at the letters themselves first before they point at them. And they're like, well, you're in the room, so you're doing this little,
right.
like Jedi mind, you're
right,
like trying to, and they're like, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? And they are constantly moving the bar, constantly, moving the goalpost, constantly moving the ball right when they're trying to kick it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I think we know by now, especially again, you, Scott, you've been in this for a while. It's going to continue. We know why. We talked about it. It's a multi-billion-dollar cash cow they're trying to protect. And it's astounding.
Brown University recently did a study about the numbers of ABA groups that were bought up by private equity over the last 5 years.
Staggering.
I can't remember the numbers, but it is. When you get the attention of private equity, you get a guaranteed government contract that, bam,
40 hours a week.
And then you get it to where you can get a very low trained, again, very well-meaning person, very much,
right. Yes,
wants to help, desires, but again, getting plugged into a system that doesn't actually meet the needs of our kids. So it's a systemic issue. It's not an issue about caring practitioners. I think the detractors, I honestly believe, is a very small group. I think the majority of
small
the
but very
SLPs,
vocal and unfortunately,
very connected. But it's the same group. It's the same 5 people.
Yeah.
It's expanding a little bit. There's a few newcomers, trying to make a name for themselves. But it's still this, they have a well-known brand, and that's that. You look at their social media, that's all they are. They all they're doing is criticizing spellers.
Well, it's a cash cow for them as well. I mean, so we're talking like there's kind of like 2 different cash cows when you're talking about kind of the naysayers or the haters. It's like, you have the industry, right? Like we said, the ABA, the ASHA, they're protecting, multi-billion-dollar industries. Then you have the others, the group of the gang of 4, gang of 5, as we want to call them, basically, that are parading around as expert witnesses, getting paid big chunks of money to just basically trot out the same old worn out, theory that they have, trying to debunk motor-based.
Right. And then it's, they had that presentation. I guess there's the big ASHA conference last fall.
Yeah.
And they had a big, they wrote another paper that was not peer reviewed. It was just their paper. And it even says that if you go look it up, you look up the article, and it says in a notation at the end, this paper has not been peer reviewed. So there's that. And then they go through and they argue that they couldn't find any, research supporting, spelled communication. But if you look at their exclusion criteria, basically, they excluded anything that wasn't their message passing test. So they're requiring the inclusion criteria basically required there to be a message passing test in it. And they keep saying that, no speller has ever passed a message passing test. They have. A lot of spellers have passed that test. Have spellers, when they've administered the test, have those spellers passed it? maybe not, but that doesn't mean in other environments and other types of saying that it has been, you know, but there's, I think like anything else, so much of what our kids deal with, so much of what they have to do is they have to practice what they're doing. And the whole idea with dyspraxia is there's like multiple steps along the way that you can get off track, you know, because there's multiple steps in praxis, right? So you have part of it is the cognitive part where you have an idea, you make a plan, and then you try to, you know, you got to hold on to that plan and not get distracted and like, you know, oh, okay, I'm going to go do this. And you're like, oh, wait, squirrel, you know, you have to hold on to the thought, hold on to the plan. You have to, then when you go to do it, you have to initiate, get started. So many of our kids have trouble with initiation.
Big trouble, yeah.
You know, and then you have to, you know, execute and perform the task. And then you have to stop yourself at the end, you know, and some of our kids, like there's times that Lily will just perseverate on, you know, and just hit a letter multiple times and like can't get herself to stop. And that's, and then they ask and they see people moving the board. And like, it's like, well, sometimes we have to reset the board when there's an initiation or an inhibition, you know, issue in the whole line of praxis and actually performing the action. And that's what they, you know, don't acknowledge or don't understand. And that, yeah, that's why a, you know, communication and regulation partner is necessary, is because there's so much to stay, you know, stay on the rails to complete the action that it requires. I honestly think it should be called a regulation and communication partner, because the regulation side is more important and more foundational than the communication side.
I agree 100%, Scott. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how I explain my role with Stone. It's really a regulation partner. I mean, it's really, I'm just sitting here, just keeping him calm, and you know, I'm just here.
The amount of sensory input they're taking, and the amount, and the thing is, they've done brain imaging studies and brain studies on autistics, and we know a few things, and there are and we got a lot of data that's out there that's not really connected, but we know a few things about the autistic brain that have that might explain why getting hijacked in that whole pathway to performing an action might happen, you know, and one of them being a concept of synaptic pruning, that autistics have a decreased level of synaptic pruning. So basically our brain forms all these neuronal pathways and all these branches, and about 2 years of age it peaks, and then from 2 years to mid to late adolescence, your brain starts pruning all those synapses and, you know, myelinating the motor pathways that get used a lot. So you're kind of building these main roads and super highways, and you're pruning back some of the side streets and back alleys, so to speak. And so about 50% of the synapses get pruned in a typical person, but only about 16% get pruned in an autistic person. So you're left with basically like, you know, a medieval European city, you know, grid where all the streets are 4 feet wide, enough for a cart and a horse. And there's side streets everywhere, and there's not a 12-lane superhighway or whatever. And there's easy to get off track. And we also know that there's increased brain communication over short distances in the brain and decreased, you know, connectivity over longer distances in the brain. So that being able to stay, okay, no, you got to stay on the street, you got to stay on here, you got to stay, you know, that is why a lot of the motor coaching is required and why it takes a long process, because we're having to build those things that haven't been built yet. because of the differences in the brain. So
Just the differences in the brain. That's a great way of explaining it. I've never heard that. I mean, I'd heard a little bit about the pruning as well. So thank you, Scott, for that, because I think that's an important piece of information that, again, that's obviously overlooked or not acknowledged. There's a real difference, like physical. Unfortunately, we're up against the clock here. I do want to wrap things up on a little bit of a hopeful side, a positive side, because I know, as we were saying, as exhausting as this can be, we are seeing signs of hope. We're seeing reasons to be positive. So I'm going to go ahead and cue up our jingle that I guarantee will be like a brainworm.
Light on the spectrum, a moment, person, or story, bringing something good. It feels hopeful, grounded, not performative. Use it for a person, a moment, a breakthrough, a story.
All right. So light on the spectrum, right? Right. So Scott, what gives you light right now? What's giving you hope as you look ahead?
Sheer numbers.
Yeah.
The number of non-speaking autistics that are getting their voice out there, Lily being one of them, obviously Stone, another one, but it's not before I think we had one or two, vocal non-speaking advocates out there publicly. And now, that it's just snowballing. There's more and more and more. And so sheer numbers would be mine.
No, I'll go along with that. And again, I know you're a member, in the same Facebook group in the spellers community. And I think it just never gets old. You're seeing, multiple times a week, kind of new spellers, new communicators who are popping up, the joy from the parents who are experiencing those breakthrough moments with them for the first time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It never gets old. I love seeing that sheer joy. Yeah. So, well, Scott, thank you again so much for being here. Thanks for speaking so honestly about both the beauty and the burden of this journey. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure. And I think one of the most important takeaways is that, skepticism isn't abstract. I mean, this hits real people. It hits Lily, it hits Stone, it hits families like us. But when, non-speakers get a chance to be heard, we have to continue to push back that the default response shouldn't be skepticism. It should be humility. It should be listening. It should be respect. And, something you had mentioned earlier, the willingness to admit that maybe we've underestimated this population for far too long.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, it is. I think you kind of encapsulated it beautifully. That there are two sides to this, and it is, but in the balance, the beauty of seeing who our kids really are and seeing that emerge is, life-changing for sure.
It's life-changing. Absolutely. And there's nothing like it. It's incredibly rewarding, as challenging as the journey has been. The rewards for me, make it more, that much more rewarding. So for everyone listening, if this episode resonated with you, please do share it. These conversations do matter. They help shift assumptions, open hearts, and move us closer to a world where communication is treated as a fundamental right and not something people have to keep proving they deserve. Thanks for listening to The Lighter Side of the Spectrum.